The rain outside the anchor grind was doing what Oregon coast rain always does in January, arriving sideways without warning like it had somewhere better to be and resented the detour. Tidewater Cove had gone gray and quiet. The harbor was still. The fishing boats knocked softly against their slips, and the only sound that carried was the low moan of the buoy bell past the breakwater. Inside the cafe, the windows had fogged along the bottom. The ship's bell above the door had rung 8 times in the last hour. 16 people sat at various tables, and not one of them was looking directly at the man in the expensive coat. They were doing what small-town people do when something uncomfortable is unfolding in a shared space, studying their phones, turning a coffee mug in slow circles, finding sudden detailed interest in the knots of the reclaimed wood tabletop beneath their hands. A collective, deliberate blindness. The woman in the slate blue sweater had pressed herself into the far corner booth, the one that looked out on the boat slips where the rain was streaking the glass in long, uneven lines. Her shoulders were rigid. Her hands were flat on the table and white at the knuckles. Cole Maddox noticed all of it from his stool at the counter. He was a marine mechanic, 36 years old, owner of Harborside Boatworks on the marina. His hands had traces of fiberglass compound along the knuckles, even though he'd cleaned up twice that morning. He had a cup of black coffee 14 minutes before he needed to be anywhere, and no particular reason to involve himself in someone else's problem. He thought about that for approximately 5 seconds. Then he put down the cup and stood up. Cole Maddox had lived in Tidewater Cove his entire life, except for 18 months he'd spent in Portland after high school working a job at a marine engine supplier and telling himself he was going to become something larger. Then his father had a heart attack and Cole came home, and the town had closed around him the way the tide closes around a rock, not trapping him exactly, but making it clear this was where he was meant to be. He'd taken over Harborside Boatworks when his father retired. He'd married Iris Calloway at 27 Inches, the small Presbyterian church on Harbor Street, on a day so foggy the photographer had to stand 8 feet away to get a clear shot. Their daughter Wren arrived the following year. Iris died of an aggressive brain tumor 5 years ago, 14 months after the first headache that wouldn't quit. She was 30. Wren was 3. Cole didn't talk about it often. There wasn't much to say that the town didn't already hold. Tidewater Cove was the kind of place where people remembered. Donna Farrell at the Marina grocery still sometimes touched his arm when she saw him. The way you touch someone who has carried something heavy for a long time and is still carrying it. He accepted this. He had survived something. He was still surviving it. What his life looked like now, up at 5:30. Coffee before anything else. The walk to the anchor grind by 7 to 10, rain or no rain, and on the Oregon coast in January it was always rain. 1 cup of black coffee. Maybe 20 words with Pete Navarro, who owned the place, and had the uncanny ability to have Cole's order ready before Cole had sat down. Then home to wake Wren get her breakfast, walk her the 3 blocks to Donna Farrell's, where Donna watched her until the school bus came. At the shop by 8, home by 5:30 unless something serious came in. Dinner with Wren. Homework. 1 chapter of whatever book they were reading together. Currently a field guide to Pacific deep-sea creatures that was technically written for marine biologists. Lights out by 8:30. That was it. That was the whole of it. It was enough. He had stopped asking whether it was enough. The morning Sloan Ashford first appeared at the anchor grind Cole was halfway through his 2nd week of January. The holidays were over. The town had that particular post-New Year's quality lights still in windows, but no longer lit people moving with the slow, rinsed-out energy of festivity that has run its course. The charter fishing crowd had thinned. The streets were wet and empty. Cole came in at his usual time. Pete set the coffee down without being asked. "Wet one," Pete said. That was the extent of it. Cole appreciated Pete for many reasons, but primarily because the man understood that some people come to a coffee shop to drink coffee, not to perform the fact that they are awake and sociable at 7 in the morning. He was halfway through his cup when he noticed her. She was sitting alone at the corner booth, the one by the window that looked out on the boat slips. She had a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She was wearing a slate blue sweater that belonged to a considerably more expensive city than Tidewater Cove. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that had probably started the day neat and was quietly coming undone. She looked maybe 31, maybe a little older. She had the particular exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept for reasons that weren't physical. And she kept watching the door. Not expectantly, watchfully, the way someone watches for something they don't want to arrive. Cole went back to his coffee. He was thinking about the Halverson family's trawler, which had come in the day before, with a prop shaft problem that was going to need parts he'd have to order from Portland. He was thinking about Wren's bioluminescence project due in 3 weeks, which he suspected he was going to end up doing roughly 60% of. He was thinking about whether to replace the shop's overhead lighting before February or just wait until spring. He was not thinking about the woman at the window booth. Then, the ship's bell above the door rang, and a man walked in. His name, Cole would learn later, was Marcus Vane. At the time, he was simply a man in a coat that cost more than Cole made in a slow month. Charcoal wool perfectly cut, moving through the cafe with the particular energy of someone who has never once had to wonder whether they were welcome somewhere. He was maybe 47, good-looking in a sharp, assembled way, the kind of face that conveyed authority in conference rooms. He crossed the cafe without glancing at anyone and stopped at the corner booth. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Cole didn't hear the first part of the conversation. He was at the counter 12 feet away, and Pete had chosen that moment to run a fresh grind. But he saw the woman's posture change the instant the man arrived. That folding inward, that careful compression, the way a person makes themselves smaller when they are bracing to hold a line. He caught fragments, making this harder than it has to be. Not doing this here, Marcus. Your obligations. I said no. The man leaned forward. He placed one hand flat on the table. It wasn't threatening in the way a raised voice is threatening. It was controlled, precise, the kind of physical dominance that has learned to dress itself in plausible deniability. Just talking, just having a conversation, nothing to see. Nobody in the cafe was looking. Cole looked. He watched the woman hold herself together through what appeared to be pure stubbornness. Her jaw was set. Her voice in the fragments he caught was steady, but her hands were flat on the table and white at the knuckles, and Cole had seen that exact configuration before, on a woman he had loved in the last months of her illness, when she was working very hard to appear more functional than she was. He set down his cup. He was aware in some distant analytical part of his brain that he didn't know anything about this situation. He was aware the man in the expensive coat might have every legitimate reason in the world for this conversation, and that Cole's read of the room could be entirely wrong. He was a marine mechanic in a small Oregon fishing town. This was none of his business. He stood up anyway. He didn't walk fast. There was nothing theatrical about it. He crossed the room and stopped at the edge of the booth, and he looked at the man and he said, "She said no." 3 words, flat, level. Not aggressive, just a statement of fact, the way you'd state the time. Marcus Vane turned and looked at Cole the way a person looks at something unexpected and mildly inconvenient. He took in the work jacket, the fiberglass residue on the knuckles, the posture that was deliberate without being combative. He assembled a quick internal assessment and arrived at a conclusion that turned out to be wrong. "This isn't your business," Marcus said. Smooth, accustomed to being the most polished voice in any room. "She said no," Cole said again. Something in the repetition seemed to confuse Marcus. He was a man used to situations escalating on his terms to being either appeased or confronted. A second quiet repetition of the same 3 words didn't fit either script. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus asked. "No," Cole said. Doesn't change what she said. The cafe had gone entirely still. Pete had stopped the grinder. 16 people were no longer pretending not to watch. Marcus Vane looked at Cole for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman in the slate blue sweater, and something in his expression shifted not to anger but to a cold, recalibrating patience. The look of a man who is very good at the long game and has just decided to play it. "We'll continue this at an appropriate time," he said to her, not to Cole. As though Cole had not spoken, as though Cole was weather. Then he left. The ship's bell above the door rang once. The rain swallowed the sound. Cole went back to his stool. He finished his coffee. He left the cafe at 7:24, walked to Donna Farrell's, dropped Wren at the school bus, and arrived at the shop at 7:58. He did not think about the woman at the window booth again until she appeared the following Monday. She was already there when he came in. Same booth, different sweater. This one, a deep burgundy knit, still too expensive for Tidewater Cove, but less conspicuously so. She had an actual cup of coffee this time, and she was drinking it. She looked up when Cole came in. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I didn't thank you properly on Friday." Cole sat down at the counter. "You don't owe me anything. I'd like to sit with you if that's all right." He considered this. He was not by nature opposed to company. He was opposed to complications. But there was something in the way she said it, direct, no performance, that suggested she wasn't especially interested in complications either. "Sure," he said. She brought her coffee over and sat down at the counter beside him. They didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. In Cole's experience, that was a reliable indicator of whether a person was going to be exhausting. She wasn't. "Sloan," she said. "Cole." "What do you do, Cole?" "Marine mechanic." "Shop on the marina." She nodded. "I drove past it. It looks like the kind of place that actually fixes things, rather than diagnosing them and pointing you somewhere else." He glanced sideways at her. "Yeah, we actually fix things. That's rarer than it should be. Not as rare as people think. They mostly just live inland." That made her smile. A small, real thing, not the performed warmth of someone trying to land well. Something that arrived without trying. "What brings you to Tidewater Cove?" he asked. A brief pause. "I needed somewhere quiet for a while." He accepted that. He knew the shape of answers like that, true as far as they went, not inviting further investigation. He had given many such answers himself. "Good town for quiet," he said. They sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Cole asked what she thought about the rain forecast, and Sloan had opinions about rain forecasts that were specific and slightly contrary, and they talked about that for a while. Then Cole had to leave. He left her his half-finished coffee, which he immediately recognized as an odd thing to do, and walked out into the rain. She was there the next morning and the one after. By the end of the second week, it had become a thing, a routine settled and easy. Cole arrived at 7 to 10. Pete made the coffee. Sloan was in the booth or came in within 5 minutes, and she moved to the counter and they talked. About the harbor, about the rain, about the gray whale migration that was supposed to peak in March, about whether Pete's clam chowder was genuinely as good as it tasted, or whether proximity to the ocean was doing most of the work. Cole found that he talked more easily than he expected to. She asked good questions, not intrusive ones, but the kind that showed she'd been listening to the previous answer. She talked about herself in partial sentences and impressionistic fragments, suggesting a life that was larger and more complicated than she was currently revealing. And Cole, who had spent 5 years respecting the privacy of grief, recognized when someone needed to hold their own story at arm's length for a while. He didn't ask what she did for work. She'd said business the second time it came up in the vague way that could mean anything. He left it there. He noticed as the days went by that she was relaxing. The watchfulness was fading. The constant listening for the door. She laughed more easily. She'd started bringing a small notebook, a field-style one with waterproof covers, and she would show him what she'd written in it or not, and either way she seemed comfortable. She'd gotten a tide chart from Pete her first week and started carrying it in her coat pocket, and Cole had noticed her consulting it on the harbor walks she apparently took in the mornings before the cafe. He noticed that he had noticed that. He told her about Wren. He told her about Iris once briefly, the way he told everyone, eventually factually without ornament. Sloan didn't do what people often did, which was to rush to fill the silence afterward with condolences and reassurance. She just said she was so young and left it where it landed. He thought about that for a long time afterward. He brought Wren on a Saturday because Donna Farrell had a family thing, and Wren needed somewhere to be, and the cafe was warm. He figured they'd sit 20 minutes and leave. He did not especially think about whether Sloan would be there. She was there. Wren, who had her mother's dark eyes and her father's unhurried manner, and approximately none of either parent's restraint when she was interested in something, walked directly up to Sloan and said, "Do you know anything about deep-sea bioluminescence?" Sloan, to her credit, did not. Looked to Cole for rescue. She looked at Wren and said, "Some. Tell me what you know." This was the correct answer. Wren knew a very great deal about deep-sea bioluminescence. She had been reading about it since October, when her class did a unit on ocean ecosystems that she had privately assessed as inadequate. Since then, she had acquired through the town library and a birthday gift from Cole's mother 5 separate books on the subject, all technically written for marine biologists. Sloan listened to all of it. She asked questions that Wren had to actually think about, not easy ones, but not condescending ones either. At one point she said, "I read somewhere that the anglerfish lure can be detected from almost 40 meters in total darkness." And Wren went rigid with the particular pleasure of someone being taken seriously and said, "Yes, most people dramatically underestimate the range." And they were off for another 20 minutes. Cole drank his coffee and watched. He noticed things he had not entirely admitted to himself he'd been noticing. The way Sloane tucked a loose strand of hair back, with a gesture that had become familiar. The way she held her cup, both hands, warming them. The fact that she'd been in Tidewater Cove for nearly 3 weeks now and showed no sign of leaving, though she'd initially given the impression of someone passing through. The way she'd said good morning to him this morning with a particular ease, as though his presence at the counter at 7 to 10 was something she had organized her expectations around. The way she was now crouched beside Wren's chair, looking at an illustration in one of the bioluminescence books Wren had inexplicably had in her backpack, and laughing at whatever Wren had just pointed to. He thought, she's lonely. And then immediately, so are you. He looked out at the rain-gray harbor. He finished his coffee. If you're enjoying this story so far, hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more where this is coming from. Hank Dillard had worked at Harborside Boatworks for 9 years, and had the particular talent of finding information he hadn't been asked to find, and presenting it with the expression of a man doing you an enormous personal favor. He found Cole on a Wednesday afternoon in the second bay underneath the Halverson trawler, adjusting the prop shaft coupling. Hank crouched at the edge of the work pit and said, "Hey, you know that woman you've been having coffee with?" Cole slid out from under the hull. He had fiberglass compound on his forearms and was mildly annoyed at the interruption. "What about her?" Hank held out his phone. The headline was from a business publication Cole had heard of and never read. The photograph above it showed Sloane in a way he had not seen her, sharp, directed in a dark blazer, at what appeared to be an industry conference, standing at a podium in front of a full auditorium. She looked like a different version of the person he'd been sitting with every morning. The same face, different orientation, like a tool in its intended use. Sloane Ashford steps back from Ashford Meridian Biotech Board amid strategic restructuring. Net worth estimated at $4.7 billion. Cole read the headline twice. He handed the phone back without a word. He stood there for a moment with his hands at his sides. "Thought you should know," Hank said, in the tone of a man who absolutely knew he was tossing a grenade. Cole picked up his wrench and went back under the trawler. He didn't sleep well that night. He lay in the dark and went back through 11 days of morning conversations, trying to find the lie in them, the angle, the performance, the shape of an ulterior motive. He was not naturally suspicious, but he was a man who had learned in the years after Iris to be careful about what he let matter. And something had started to matter. And now it was wearing a shape he couldn't account for. Why was she here? Why Tidewater Cove specifically? Why the counter stool at the anchor grind? Why the conversations about whale migrations and rain forecasts and bioluminescent fish? What did a woman worth $4.7 billion want from a marine mechanic in a small Oregon coast town? The answer that kept coming back, maybe nothing, maybe just this was the one he distrusted most. He didn't answer her call the next morning, or the one after. She came on a Thursday, 2 in the afternoon, quiet midweek. Cole was replacing the engine mounts on a client's cabin cruiser. He heard the shop bell above the bay door and looked up and saw her. She was in a coat he hadn't seen before, long, dark, forest green, good quality. Her hair was down. She was holding her own hands in front of her, not in her pockets. He had noticed that was something she did when she was uncertain. He had filed it away without meaning to. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been busy." She looked at the cabin cruiser, at the single-engine mount he'd managed to swap in the last hour, at the set of his shoulders. She didn't say anything about any of it. "You know," she said, "Hank found an article." She nodded. She came a few steps into the shop out of the frame of the bay door. The cold came in with her and was absorbed by the space. She looked at the workbench, the tools organized in the particular way that said someone used them, put them back, and thought about where they lived. She looked at the tide calendar on the wall, a free one from a marine supply company, the kind nobody buys voluntarily. She looked at everything except him for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I didn't lie to you," she said. "I told you I was in business. That's what I am. You let me believe something that wasn't true. I let you see something that was true. The rest, the company, the board, all of that, that's true too. But it's not the part of me I came here to be." She stopped. "I needed somewhere to just be a person for a while. I didn't expect to meet anyone. I didn't plan for you." "I'm not a project," Cole said. He heard the edge in his own voice and didn't pull it back. "Wren isn't a project." Something crossed her face. "Is that what you think this has been? I don't know what to think." "Yes, you do." She said it quietly. "You know exactly what this has been. You're just afraid of it. That landed somewhere accurate, which made it worse. You should go back to your world, he said. The board, the restructuring, whatever it is. I'm a mechanic in a fishing town. I have a daughter and a shop and a mortgage on a house that needs a new roof before October. I don't know what version of me you think fits into your life, but whatever it is, you've got the math wrong. I haven't asked you to fit into anything. You will. She stood there for a moment. She didn't argue. She didn't try to fix it. She looked at him with an expression that wasn't wounded. It was something quieter than that and more durable. The look of someone who has survived worse and is not entirely surprised to find this shape of pain. All right, she said. She left. The shop bell rang once. The cold came in again briefly and then was gone. Cole looked at the half-finished engine mount. He picked up the socket wrench and put it back down. He stood there for a while with the particular stillness of a man who has just said something he's going to have to live with. Ren Maddox was 8 years old and in possession of the uncanny emotional precision that some children carry, the ability to locate the exact weight of an unspoken thing in a room and identify it without ceremony. She noticed that Sloane stopped coming to the cafe. She noticed this the first morning and said nothing. She noticed it the second morning and said nothing. On the third morning, she sat at the kitchen table over her oatmeal and looked at her father with the expression she had inherited with impossible precision directly from her mother. Patient. Direct, slightly too perceptive for comfort. Where's Sloane? She asked. She had to get back to her work. Cole poured his own coffee and looked out the window at the rain. Did she move away? I don't know. Ren was quiet for a moment, processing. Did you have a fight? Not a fight? What then? It's complicated. She ate a spoonful of oatmeal. You always say that about things that aren't actually complicated. You said it was complicated when I asked why boats rust faster in salt water than fresh water, and that's just chemistry. Cole looked at her. She looked back. She wasn't honest with me about something he said, meaning it as the end of the conversation. Did she lie? Not exactly. Then what? She left things out. Ren considered this. You leave things out too, she said. You never told Donna Farrell why you look sad sometimes when you think nobody's watching. That's leaving things out. He opened his mouth and then closed it. You told me that when you hurt someone, even by accident, you have to say sorry. That's the rule. You made it the rule. I didn't hurt her, Ren. She said it with a gentleness that had no business existing in the voice of an 8-year-old. You sent her away in the rain. He looked at his coffee cup. He looked out at the harbor. She left things out because she was scared. He knew that. He had done exactly the same thing for 5 years to everyone. What if I already messed it up, he said. He hadn't fully intended to say it out loud. Then you fix it, Ren said. That's literally what you do. She went back to her oatmeal with the air of someone who had closed the matter. Cole sat with his coffee and the specific sensation of being completely outmaneuvered by a third grader. He found her on a Saturday morning on the jetty path, the half-mile trail along the breakwater behind the elementary school. She had mentioned it once in passing that she'd been walking it in the mornings, that the sound of the Pacific coming through the rocks under the fog was something she had never heard anywhere else and didn't entirely trust, was real. He'd remembered that. He'd filed it away without meaning to. The rain had paused, which on the Oregon coast in January meant a different kind of cold cleaner with the smell of open water. The path was empty. His boots made the wet stone sound of the coast deliberate, muffled, like a conversation being held just below the surface of hearing. He saw her ahead, standing at the railing of the wooden overlook that jutted out over the rocks, looking down at the water. She heard him coming. She turned. They looked at each other across 20 feet of path. He closed the distance. I owe you an apology, he said. She waited. I got scared, he said. I built a story in my head about what it meant, who you were, what you wanted, why none of it could be real. And I used that story to push you away before you could leave on your own. He stopped. That was unfair to you. You were honest about what mattered. I held the rest against you. The fog moved across the rocks below them. A wave came in and broke. I'm not good at this, he said. I've been a specific version of my life for 5 years and it works. I know how it works. And you are something that doesn't fit the version I know how to do. That scared me. That's mine. It's not yours. Cole, I'm not finished. She stopped. I have a daughter who tells me what I already know, in the same voice her mother used. And she told me I owe you an apology. She was right. He looked at Sloane in the gray morning, the fog between them. I don't care about the company. I don't care about the money. I care that for 11 mornings I had a reason to get to the cafe before my coffee went cold. I care that Ren talked about anglerfish with someone who actually deserved to hear about them. I care that you laughed at Pete's chowder with me, and that none of that was a lie, regardless of what I was too afraid to trust. The fog shifted. A harbor seal surfaced in the rocks below, looked at them briefly, and dove. Sloane looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was the one he had come to recognize as her arriving at something, not calculating, but working toward clarity. I should have told you sooner, she said. I know that. I told myself I was protecting something. But I was scared, too, of exactly what you described. That it would change what this was. That you'd look at me differently. I did look at you differently, he said. And now he took a breath of cold Pacific air. Now I'm standing in the fog asking you not to go. Something in her face shifted. That small, real smile, the one that arrived without planning. She took one step, then another. The 20 feet became nothing. He put his arms around her. She put her head against his chest. The fog settled on both of them equally, the way it settles on everything in January in Tidewater Cove, without preference or distinction. I don't need anything from you, she said against his coat. I need you to understand that. I know, he said. I just wanted the mornings. You can have the mornings. From somewhere behind them on the path, a small voice said, finally. They both turned. Ren was standing 25 feet back in her bright orange rain jacket, hands clasped behind her, with the expression of someone who had orchestrated this outcome and found the results satisfactory. Ren Cole said. Were you following me? I was walking, she said with great dignity. This is a public path. Sloane laughed, the real one, the one that took her by surprise, that broke open in the cold air before she could catch it. Cole heard it. He filed it away. This time, he intended to. Go ahead and drop a comment. I want to know what you thought of that moment on the jetty. What happened over the next 6 months in Tidewater Cove, Oregon, in approximately the order it occurred. Marcus Vane appeared one more time. It was a Tuesday in late February. He came to the boat shop, which told Cole he had run out of other approaches. He was still in the expensive wool coat. Still smooth. He looked at the shop, at Cole, at Sloane, who happened to be there because she had started stopping by in the afternoons, and the stopping by had become a thing neither of them announced. Marcus said something careful and pointed about the wisdom of certain associations and the risk of sentiment clouding strategic clarity. Sloane looked at him for one long beat. Marcus, she said, I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say. She said it in a voice Cole had not heard before, not the cafe voice. Not the jetty path voice. Something else entirely, level, absolutely certain, the voice that had presumably moved things in rooms Cole would never walk into. This is not an association I'm reconsidering. This is my life. You no longer have standing in it. Marcus Vane left. He didn't come back. Hank Dillard apologized to Cole for the way he'd delivered the article, clumsy, not malicious. Cole accepted this because it was accurate on both counts. Donna Farrell asked Cole with extraordinary casualness whether the woman who'd been seen around the marina was the Sloane Ashford. Cole said yes. Donna said oh, and then made a heroic and visible effort not to say anything further, which Cole appreciated more than any other response she could have given. Ren developed the habit of texting Sloane questions about deep-sea biology at approximately 7:45 inches the evening after Cole had said it was too late to call. Sloane answered all of them. Cole discovered this by accident 3 weeks in, read one exchange about the navigation systems of Pacific leatherback turtles, and said nothing about it, because the answers were excellent, and Ren was learning things. The Anchor Grind received a grant. It came through a Coastal Revitalization Foundation, $340, 000, the name of which meant nothing to Pete Navarro until his accountant made a call, and reported back who sat on the foundation's board. Pete called Cole to report this. Cole said he'd heard something about it. Pete said she didn't have to do that. Cole said no, she didn't have to do anything. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he said, okay, in the tone of a man who has understood something and decided it was good. The cafe renovation finished in April. There was a reading corner near the harbor window with 2 deep armchairs and real light. There was a back room that could be booked for community use, the library claimed Thursday afternoons, and the elementary school used it for after-school tutoring on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It became the kind of space the town hadn't known it was missing until it appeared. Sloane divided her time between Tidewater Cove and wherever Ashford Meridian needed her to be, which turned out to be less constant than she'd initially feared. The board restructuring, that had been consuming her since the previous fall, resolved itself in March, in a way that left her with considerably more autonomy than before. She told Cole about this over coffee one morning in terms that made clear it was complicated, and also that she found it substantially less interesting than the question of whether Pete's sourdough starter had genuinely been active since 2008, or whether that was a story Pete told for atmosphere. Cole's house roof got fixed in September, which was later than he'd planned, but earlier than it might have been. It had nothing to do with Sloan except that she had asked him once in passing whether he'd gotten the estimate yet. The asking had made him do the thing he'd been putting off. He noticed she did that, asked about things not to manage them but to hold them in her attention for a moment, in a way that made it easier for him to hold them in his. He noticed that she was in very specific and practical ways a careful person. Not cautious, careful. There was a difference. Wren finished her bioluminescence project in March. Her teacher described the result as exceptional. Cole described it privately as inevitable. Sloan had helped with the section on the anglerfish and the deep zone light spectrum, and at one point had said that the deepest parts of the ocean are interesting precisely because they're so hard to reach that you have to want the understanding badly enough to go after it in the dark. Wren had thought about that for a long time. In August on a Saturday evening, the three of them drove out to the seawall overlook above the harbor at dusk, because someone had reported a pod of harbor seals hauled out on the rocks below. They parked and walked to the wall and stood in the cooling evening air and watched 11 seals arranged on the flat granite in the particular motionless sprawl of animals who know exactly where they belong and are not troubled by being observed. Wren stood between them. She reached up, one hand in Cole's, one hand in Sloane's, without announcing it, without making it a ceremony. She just reached up, and they both took hold, and they stood there watching the seals until the light went amber and then gray. Here is what Cole Maddox understood by the end of that year. He understood that love the second time does not feel like the first time, and is not supposed to. The first time is discovery. The second time is recognition, slower, more deliberate, arrived at through a series of small conscious choices. It asks more of you. It is harder to dismiss. He understood that Wren had at every stage understood the situation better than he had. This did not particularly surprise him. He understood that the shop was still the shop. Same rhythms, same tide schedule, same smell of fiberglass and salt water in the air. That had not changed. He had not wanted it to change. He understood that Sloan Ashford, CEO of Ashford Meridian Biotech, took her coffee with a splash of oat milk and no sugar. That she always held the cup with both hands. That she kept a worn tide chart in the left pocket of whatever coat she was wearing and sometimes traced the coastline on it with one finger while she was thinking, and that this was not a habit she'd had before Tidewater Cove. He understood that she laughed hardest at things that surprised her, which meant she laughed most freely around Wren. He understood that the mornings at the anchor grind still happened, still mattered, still organized the day around themselves. Pete still had the coffee ready before you asked. The rain still arrived sideways off the Pacific every January, and the harbor bell still knocked in the current, and the fog still settled over the jetty path without preference or announcement. And he understood that he had walked across a cafe on a Friday morning in January in a work jacket with compound on his knuckles and said 3 words to a man who needed to hear them. 3 words. Not heroic, not dramatic, just the obvious thing said plainly at the right moment. Sometimes the smallest act of basic decency, standing up when no one else will, saying the clear thing out loud, is a stone dropped in water. You cannot know when you drop it how far the rings will travel. You cannot know what finds you after. In August on a Saturday, the 3 of them stood on the seawall above the harbor in the fading light. 11 harbor seals below them, unhurried, unbothered. Wren reached up and took both their hands without ceremony. They held on. Outside, the rain returns to Tidewater Cove the way it always does. It falls on the shop roof and the jetty railing and the new reading corner windows at the anchor grind. It falls on the seawall where 3 people once stood watching. Cole Maddox is not alone. He put down his cup one morning. He crossed a room. He said 3 words. The rest was just being willing to stay still long enough to receive what came.